Alrighty, hello everyone. I'm assuming if you are hearing my voice, we are on the phone call. My name is Brian Riesen, a Senior Application Consultant here at Zobrio for Financial Edge. And if you are not on the Zoom session already and seeing my screen, you can join at zoom.us and enter code 658-179-560, and that should get you to the presentation slides that I'll walk you through today. Today's topic will be preparing Financial Edge for 1099 year-end processing. This is all in preparation for next month's 1099 printing that will happen. So this will get you into how to check all your vendors and the activity. We're not going to be actually printing the forms today. This is showing you what you need to do to prepare for everything. So just a little bit of housekeeping notes here. These slides will be made available to you upon request. I'll have my email address at the end that you can email me and ask for copies of these slides. And our marketing man, Jim, will be putting this presentation, a recording of it, up on our Zobrio YouTube channel for playback later. If you've never checked out the Zobrio YouTube channel, go ahead and check it out. All our presentations that we've done in the past are listed out there. Some notes in general. The tax forms themselves for 1099s can be ordered through Blackbaud directly at forms.blackbaud.com, or you can call the IRS at 1-800-TAX-FORM. And I believe last I checked, the forms from the IRS are still free upon request. These forms are going to be pre-printed. It's my understanding that from former Fundware clients, excuse me, that they had blank forms which were printed all through the export and Atrix. Everything is printed through Financial Edge directly, and the forms are pre-printed. You just put them in the printer and the amounts print in the right boxes. When you order your forms, you're going to want your transmitter control code that you got from the IRS available to you. Another note, this sometimes comes up as a question, so I want to address it here. Any AP liabilities that are generated from payroll, so those AP expenses that you print that were created from payroll liabilities, those are still printed out of the accounts payable 1099 forms module if you need to. They're not printed out of the payroll section. I'm going to give you some information here that I've checked as of yesterday, but as always, you want to check the irs.gov/form 1099 MISC for the most recent information if they ever change anything. It has happened where they've changed things in January, so always check on their site for the latest. The 1099 miscellaneous forms have a $600 minimum, so if the vendor does not reach $600 of 1099 activity, they won't print out a form for them, and you're not required to send them one. You have to furnish copy B to the vendors by January 31st, 2016, or on February 15th if you're reporting payments in box 8 or 14. Copy A is filed with the IRS by February 28th if you're doing a paper form, or March 31st if you're doing it electronically. So what I'm going to be walking you through here momentarily is what the overall process is for preparing your 1099 processing. Most of this is going to be done by looking at the 1099 vendor activity report. We're going to run this report a couple times. The first time, we're going to look at the report with everybody listed and review it for any missing vendors. Then, once we see anything in there that's missing, we're going to go into the vendor records and update 1099 statuses if needed. We're going to rerun that 1099 activity report and look at the details of it, and then update any vendor details that we need to from that point, and enter any 1099 adjustments if some of the amounts are off. Some things that should be set already, but I always like to mention it because it's always good to check. I'm a little OCD in this area. Your federal ID number, that's your organization's federal ID number, should be already set in accounts payable under configuration in the general section right below your address for your organization is the bottom field is the federal ID number. So go just make sure that there's something listed there. My guess is if it's there, it's probably already correct. The other section in that area is the state ID numbers, and this is the same in AP Configuration General. On the right-hand side, you'll see your state ID numbers. Most of people will only have one listed, but depending on if you're in a border county or not, you may have a couple different states listed here. And again, once those areas are set, you probably never need to go back and change them again. So moving on into actually running our 1099 activity report. We're going to go into Accounts Payable Reports module, look under Vendor Reports, and the 1099 activity report is listed right there. We click New to create a brand new report. And on the General tab of this report, the first thing we want to check is, depending on when we're running it, check your date that you're doing it for this calendar year. So for example, if we're doing the 1099s today, we'll want to make sure this is for 1099 or for this calendar year. So you'll see, like most financial ledger reports, it'll list the dates for you for what you've actually picked. And this is all in preparation for 1099s. But when we actually go to print these forms in January, we'll need to make sure that this box is picked for the last calendar year and that the dates are for 2015. We also want to make sure to include all three check boxes here. So we're going to include vendors with 1099 activity that are not marked as 1099 vendors. We're going to include vendors with zero activity and those with vendors activity below the 1099 minimum of that $600. Once we preview this report, we'll get a list of all the vendors. And in my sample data, I just gave a little screenshot of what the report preview will look like. You'll want to print this report and go through it and check it. So you'll see vendors with no activity, so we need to verify those should not have any activity. We'll see Alpha Graphics here has a 245, so they have some 1099 activity, but because it's below that minimum right now, they won't print a 1099 form. Now, if we had activity between now and December 31st that put them above that $600 threshold, they would indeed get a form printed in January. And we see also we have Phil Carpenter down here who hit 625, so he's definitely going to get a 1099 form. Now let's say we're looking at this report. We're going to look at it and say, hey, you know what, ABC Office Supply, I know that they've got activity and they're a 1099 vendor, so why are they not showing on this report? So what we're going to want to do at that point is open up our vendor record itself. So when we go into AP records and vendors and open up our vendor record, excuse me, we need to make sure of a couple pieces of information on the vendor record in order to print 1099s for them. First, in FE, we mark this 1099 vendor checkbox. This is what tells us, and the system looks at to see if they are a 1099 vendor, yes or no. So make sure that box is marked. Sometimes they get left off as when we add a new vendor, we forget to mark that box. Also make sure that vendor's tax ID field is listed and populated with their proper number. The other thing we're going to want to do is click the address button right here. Remember, in Financial Edge, we can have multiple addresses, so we'll click that address. This is not the multiple addresses listed here, though, by the way. This is the main vendor address. And when we select the Options tab, we have some 1099 information at the bottom. This information is what we'll print on the 1099 form itself. This does not have to be the same as what is on the vendor's main vendor name tab. You may commonly refer to them as such when you're looking them up for entering invoices and payments. However, for 1099 forms, they may need to be listed as this, like Jerry Smith, DL Landscaping. We also want to make sure that we mark this checkbox for the default address for 1099 forms. So this will be the address that is going to print on the 1099 forms itself. And when we click OK and save that vendor record, that will be saved. The other thing we want to check back on the General tab, next to that checkbox is the 1099 distribution. If you see a circle with a slash, that means there's no information in there. If you see this check mark, that means we have a distribution information. But go ahead and click that, and it'll bring up a window that will show us our distribution for that 1099 for this vendor. So what this means is this is what box on the 1099 form will their data print for, and where do we distribute their activity to. So in this example, we can see we have the 1099 box 7 non-employee compensation. For me, I live in South Carolina, so my sample data, I set up everything with South Carolina. So they would be listed here, and 100% of their activity should be reported in South Carolina. Now, there are some places where you might have to have it split between, 50% here, 50% there, and you could put that appropriately. And on the invoice level, you can always pick that individually. But once we get that set and make sure it's right, the remaining should be 0, so it's 100% distributed. We click OK and save the vendor record. Now, once all our vendors are updated, we have them all marked appropriately, distributed appropriately, the address information has been verified, we go back into the reports and rerun that 1099 activity report. This time, we're going to have a couple different settings on the report parameters. We're only going to include vendors with activity below the box minimum. We're going to make sure our date's correct still. We also want to unmark these other 2 check boxes so we don't include vendors without any activity. And we don't want to include vendors that are not marked as 1099 vendors. The other thing we're going to do is on the Format tab of this report, we're going to highlight the Detail section and mark the Include State Detail section. This will ensure that we have the appropriate state listed for those vendors' activities. Now, if we preview this report, we're going to see here's the additional state detail information. So we have just our 1099 vendors that are marked as such, their activity listed. Notice we marked that checkbox is still below the minimum so we can see what the activity is. And again, I'm preparing, so I'm in December, so this may still top 600 by the end of the year. We just want to make sure we know all our 1099 vendors that we're reviewing now. We look down here, this state ID on Carl Johns. It's not marked with any state. It's got no something. It's kind of truncated. So we'll want to go in there and check him to make sure his distribution button has that check mark on it and not the circle with the slash. So again, these are all review reports to make sure we're getting ready to be good in January to print these forms. We are also going to look at this report and say, you know what? I know they had more than that, less than that, or we need to adjust the amounts for that vendor. So perhaps you had a vendor that was not marked as 1099. None of the invoices were flagged as 1099 throughout the year. So you need to add some 1099 details to a specific box. And Financial Edge makes that very easy for you. We go back into the vendor record. And in the bottom left, where the 1099 information is for the other stuff, there's also a 1099 adjustments button. All you need to do is click that button. It'll pop up a window for you. And here we put in a few pieces of information. We put the effective date. Most auditors, I've heard people tell me, they like to put all adjustments in the last day of the calendar year. So in this case, we'd put December 31st, 2015. Put the box number that we need to change, whether it's increase or decrease. Pick that box, pick your state, and then put the amount that you need to adjust. If you need to reduce it, you put in minus. If you need to increase it, you put just the regular amount in there as a positive amount. Because our settings have it in parentheses, you can see I put a negative $300 for this vendor. Okay. If we needed to move, for example, an amount from box 8 to box 7, we would put a negative amount. So say if we needed to move, they had a $500 worth of activity, we'll put negative 500 for box 8 in one row, and then a positive 500 in box 7 on another row. And that would move it to the appropriate box for us. Sometimes things like that happen, so it's very easy to adjust it. And that's all we need to do. You can always rerun that 1099 activity report after all your adjustments and just keep that middle box to keep including vendors below the minimum so that you have a full list of who your 1099 vendors are. And once they're good, we'll be ready to run the forms in January. And as I mentioned before, the forms in Financial Edge, if you're new to Financial Edge this year, They're all printed directly out of Financial Edge. In Fundware, I think you had to export it to an Excel file, then bring it into the Atrix software to do the forms. Atrix is actually built right into the Financial Edge software. It'll automatically pop up with all the form software, and it extracts the data automatically from Financial Edge based on all those checkboxes and the vendor records that we just adjusted. So the forms in Financial Edge, if you go into Mail, Forms module, the only form listed for accounts payable is going to be the 1099 forms. If you click New and start processing through it, it lets you go through and say you're just going to test it a little bit. There's a lot of information on those fields that is data that you have for specific to your organization, like your tax IDs and things like that. So you want to make sure you have all that handy for your AP person. And it allows you to either print, e-file, or do a combination of printing and e-filing depending on the vendors. At Zobrio, we do offer 1099 printing and preparing assistance. We will be reaching out to all of our Financial Edge clients here over the next couple of weeks to see if anybody would request that. It is not included as part of the client care agreement, so there will be a fee involved, but we will talk about that, and we'll have, I believe it's Matt Kreutzer on our sales team, to go ahead and discuss that with you. And that is what I have today. Jim, if you could unmute everybody, or I believe you can unmute yourself on the phones. If you have any questions, you can feel free to chime in now and ask. My email, as I promised, is brian.riesen@zobrio.com. So you can email me anytime after this presentation, next week, whatever, and ask me for a copy of these slides. And they'll also be up on the YouTube channel. If you don't know where that is, I can send you a link to that as well. So do we have any questions today? All right, I'll take it that silence is golden and that I just wowed you all so much to digest everything. I appreciate everybody attending today. If you think of something afterwards, you can always email me with a question as well, and I'll be happy to answer that for you. So good luck going through and preparing all your 1099 vendors for processing next month, and we will see everybody later. Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.